How very dare you, FIA, race promoters all over the world. $10,000 for Las Vegas. What are we doing? £2,500 a pop to sit at a table at the Las Vegas Grand Prix and be hosted by a celebrity chef. Are you having a laugh? Mercedes won't want to sabotage Lewis to where they don't get any points, but they want to sabotage him enough to where the driver that will be at Mercedes next year gets the most points. So Baxty, to that you say what, sir?
Nonsense. George isn't the kind of guy that needs favours and leg ups and backhanders from Mercedes. He doesn't need that. He backs himself. He went to Mercedes to take on the greatest driver there's ever been.
Like it's just an easy, lazy way out to say that it's Mercedes sabotaging Lewis, when it's much harder to confront the truth, which is that Lewis just needs to do a bit better.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Mercedes are sabotaging Lewis. But Baxter, I think it's naive almost to say that it's not in Mercedes' interest to ensure that the driver who will be there next year doesn't beat the driver who will not be there next year. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown podcast. With me as always, my brothers, my brethren, the legends that are Sir Baxty and the one they call Shazo, aka the A-side. How are we doing, chaps? It doesn't matter how you are doing because we need to talk about some F1-age. It has been chaos in the week that was. Should we talk about James Allison first, gents? Because he had some things to say, didn't he, on the Beyond the Grid podcast. Baxty, I will pitch at you first. How did you ingest/react to James Allison's appearance on the Beyond the Grid podcast?
So full disclosure, I haven't finished it. I'm still listening to it. But there was a slight matter of work and a England football match, which I don't want to talk about.
What are both of those things?
But I got the main points from it, and I thought that he was refreshingly honest about Mercedes' problems these last 3 years. He was candid about the errors that they made, as candid as he could be, because obviously there's certain things he would never talk about in a public forum like that. He was brutally honest about drivers, very openly saying that he felt the best driver he'd ever worked with and the best driver he'd ever seen was Lewis. Over Michael as well, because he's the only one of the few people in the sport to have worked with both 7-time world champions. So he's uniquely qualified to speak on that part. Obviously there will be those bad faith actors that will find the little clips and take them out of context and get people moaning about contracts and everything else. I didn't read too much into that comment, but it's an illuminating interview. I think it's a must listen for anyone. I think Allison is an incredibly captivating speaker. And I think he is definitely steering Mercedes in the right direction. They can see it. They know what they're doing. And I think we should not race wins, but I think we can hope for some more podiums in the future this season.
Well, he spoke specifically to that point, didn't he, Baxty, where he said that he expects a mean reversion of sorts and that the Canadian Grand Prix, owing to its characteristic stop-start, slow hairpin-esque turns, potentially flattered to deceive as far as the extent of their improvements. Talk to me, Shazinho. How did you ingest James Allison's Beyond the Grid podcast appearance, sir?
Well, I ingested it via YouTube. It was on my TV. It was a nice way of listening to it. He's got a good voice, and I think any time you get a chance to listen to James Allison, especially for an extended period of time, you should take it, because as he says himself, he doesn't care about his career. He'll just say things as they are, and he's got a really nice way of explaining things so that it's really clear what he's talking about, and even complicated technical subjects he can break them down quite nicely so that like idiots like me can still understand what he's saying. And there was a lot for him to talk about. I think this is the first time I've heard him sort of extensively talk about all of the problems that Mercedes have had all the way back from 2022 onwards, and how that might even have been fed in from all of the successful seasons that they had prior to that. So it's quite, as you say, actually refreshing to hear somebody talk so candidly and eloquently about the problems, how that affects them personally, how that affects the team. Some of the things that he said absolutely squashed any suggestion about sabotage. How can you have someone that says that I couldn't sleep because we were doing badly. There were people that were taking it out on their families because we're not doing well. How can a team like that then be sabotaging one of their cars to get worse results? That doesn't add up for me. And then there was as you say, a nice conversation about the drivers. Although I have to say, uh, James Allison has worked with both those drivers, but he seems to be very focused on the car and the technical aspect of it. So I'm not sure he's absolutely the oracle when it comes to driver performance. But it's definitely interesting to hear what he had to say about Lewis.
I want to get really deep into the James Allison interview, but I just want to pick up on something that you said, Shez, because I was picked up on it in turn, saying that, listen, why would I use one of Baxter's lines? Why would Mercedes, with billions of pounds on the line and reputation and corporate sponsorships and all this other stuff on the line, what would be their why to sabotage Lewis? And the response, the way that this person pulled me up and said that they wouldn't do something as obvious as take off Lewis Hamilton. Because my response was, listen, if I were Toto Wolff and you were accusing me falsely of sabotaging, then I would go full send scorched earth. The next time I sabotaged Lewis Hamilton, there would be no argument. It would be clear and obvious for all to see. I'm gonna get the accusation anyway, right? Why am I serving the time if I didn't do the crime? So have some of this. And the response to that was, Mercedes won't want to sabotage Lewis to where they don't get any points, but they'll want to sabotage him enough to where the driver that will be at Mercedes next year gets the most points. So Baxter, to that you say what, sir?
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. This is a 7-time world champion we're talking about. It doesn't matter if Lewis beats George, because if Lewis beats George, Lewis beats George, he should do that. It really doesn't matter. It's if, let's say, all the chaos aligns and Max Verstappen says, right, tomorrow, for example, I'm off to Mercedes next year. Are Red Bull going to sabotage him and cost him a championship? Absolutely not. Or did they sabotage Sebastian Vettel on the way out in 2014? No. Did they sabotage Daniel Ricciardo on the way out in 2018? More likely, but probably not, because his engines kept blowing up. But it's just an absolute nonsense to suggest that they would do that. To protect George, to give George a nice little ego boost because he beat Lewis 2-1 in terms of season finishes. Doesn't matter. This is Lewis Hamilton. He's a 7-time world champion. It really does not matter. And it's not about protecting George. And George wouldn't want that anyway. George is the kind of guy that he wants to beat Lewis on merit. He beat Lewis on merit in 2022. He lost to Lewis on merit last year. And in his last season with him, he will want to make sure that he beats him on merit. Because George isn't the kind of guy that needs favors and leg ups and backhanders from Mercedes. He doesn't need that. He backs himself. He went to Mercedes to take on the greatest driver there's ever been. Not many drivers would do that. But George went, yeah, I'll have some of that. It's a nonsense argument.
But Baxter, I'll see that and raise you this. Once your screw job settings right, the departing champion, always has to drop the belt. True or false?
There isn't a belt to drop. The belt is currently in the possession of a Dutchman in Milton Keynes.
Better. You understand the analogy though, right?
I get your analogy, but no, it doesn't. It doesn't ring true for me. What I would say is go and watch Revolution this year, and the champion went out with his belt. So
to another. Go on, detail Baxter. I'm keen on this since we're going deep into the WWE.
Well, it was just very
mythos.
quickly. It was AEW, and Sting retired as tag team champion.
Oh, yeah, but that's different, mate. Where are
He
we
did the
going?
whole thing himself. He
Yeah,
basically did the whole thing himself.
but retiring is something very different, right? If you're leaving WWE to go to then WCW, you've got to drop the belt, chap. And I think it's not dissimilar,
There's not a
bruv.
belt to drop. It's just they've been equal teammates for 2 years, for 2.5 years, and they will continue to be equal teammates for the rest of their time. It's not like all of it. Let's say Valtteri was still there, and Valtteri was staying, and they were bringing in George next year, and then they felt like, oh well, actually maybe we should let Valtteri get one over on Lewis this year, but because Lewis had been the dominant teammate throughout their partnership because of championship battles and everything else. But that they've been equal teammates since day one. Since day one, it makes no sense to prioritize George over what, other than the fact that George is ahead in the championship currently. It makes no sense to prioritize.
I'm not buying that, Baxter. Here's Shaz. I'm going to throw this to you very quickly. I don't think that Mercedes, on the balance of evidence, I don't think that Mercedes are sabotaging Lewis. But Baxter, I think it's naive almost to say that it's not in Mercedes' interest to ensure that the driver who will be there next year doesn't beat the driver who will not be there next year. Shez, to that you react how, sir? Am I making sense?
Yeah, but that's the argument that's been sent my way and our way, like over and over and over again. And for me, that just sounds like a coping mechanism. And actually, I think that's dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to say, because the easy way out of all of this is to basically just go, it's not Lewis's fault, it's Mercedes' fault, and that is dangerous because it absolves him of any responsibility for his own performance, when actually he should be internalizing it, looking at himself and working out what the heck can I do to do better. And if you look at his qualifying performances, it's not been second, it's been like minor tenths of a second off of George, and it's been specific instances within specific laps. Like, he can talk about, oh, I lost a tenth or two, but like George has also lost a tenth or two between free practice and qualifying. It's just that they're converging from different, they're coming at it from different points, but the car is the car. And I agree with back to you. There's no benefit to boosting George's ego. In fact, if you're having to do that, you've got the wrong freaking driver. Get somebody else. If that's the problem, if your current driver can't beat the outgoing driver, then mate, you need to get a better driver. And maybe that's why they're going after Max. I don't know, but I don't see this as that. I don't see it as Merck sabotaging Lewis. Yes, there is going to be an element that the outgoing driver is not going to get the same treatment as the driver that is there. Like, but that's about turning up to debriefs. And if there's one item of a development that's available, yes, the driver incumbent that's going to stay there is going to get that element. Although the evidence that Mercedes is that even that isn't happening. They're getting equal treatment on parts that are only where there's only one available. Why would they have to admit to that? Even if
I will say this, that I think Lewis's comments in their media call today was very telling, where he did actually have to come out and say, look, I know what's going on, that George is receiving a hell of a lot of, he is doing a phenomenal job and he should not be punished for that. Lewis coming to the defense of his teammate, which I've never seen him do before. He did that after being asked a question. He answered the question, and he's rallying the supporters, people like us, to get behind the team. Like the three of us, we do that every weekend. Despite our reservations about the direction and everything else, we still get behind the team 100% when it comes to race weekend. And Lewis has felt the need, I think, for the first time in his career, really, to actually put his head above and go, this needs to calm down. And I don't know if he's been seeing the reaction. I know he is a lot more active on social media than he lets on. He'll probably see quite a lot of the nonsense and the conspiracy theory tin hat threads that were going around over the last week. I will not go into detail, but People that watch this podcast and follow me on Twitter will know exactly what I mean. But yeah, it's just,
Actually, that's just it, though, isn't it? That like, I think it's actually fine for the fan base to sit and talk about Sabotage, right? I actually don't care. Like if that's what you think it is, go for it. As long as Lewis isn't thinking that, and his comments at the end of the Montreal weekend suggested actually that there was a recognition there that, you know what, this isn't
him.
all
Yeah.
external. I need to do something about this. That was the most important quote I heard all weekend, because I needed to hear it's not external. I need to be better.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe he has the capacity to do that, and that we'll start to see it over the course of the rest of the season. But that's the distinction. Like it's just an easy, lazy way out to say that it's Mercedes sabotaging Lewis, when it's much harder to confront the truth, which is that Lewis just needs to do a bit better.
Yeah. I will say this: Spain is historically a very good track for Lewis, so this weekend is going to be fascinating to see how he gets on.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
If he, okay, look, if he's still within that sort of 10th margin that you would expect from him in qualifying to George, then okay, fine. But if he out qualifies him and starts getting on a run, because we are heading to tracks that he's traditionally very strong at, then we'll realise that actually maybe he has upped his game, and he's just that what was happening in the previous 9 races was just pure underperformance.
Yeah, and block. I mean, for me, I'm going to have to block out the noise that is, he's doing better because Mercedes have caved in and are now not sabotaging his car, because that.
Oh, that's of course.
But there's never a way to win that argument, is there?
Bad faith factors will always be bad faith factors because their engagement numbers require it.
Oof, I don't hate that.
Let's not talk about engagement.
But I still think I still think you guys are being a tad naive. Not saying on the balance of evidence that Lewis has been sabotaged, but there's not agency in a sport like Formula One, gents. That you're telling me that there is absolutely no reason why Mercedes might want for George Russell to beat Lewis Hamilton. I think that's obscene. I think you both are bad faith actors to say that that's nonsense. I agree with you that there isn't necessarily evidence of sabotage, at least not season to date. I agree with you if we're going to put our objective caps on. But to say this is F1 and this is Mercedes and this is Toto Wolff, who Ross Brawn talks about so eloquently in his bloody book. I think you guys are bad faith actors and a tad naive. That's my point. That's
I agree
my
to
story.
disagree.
That's my story, and I'm sticking it. Go on, let's talk about this James Allison thing. Because if we're talking about underperformance, he talks about this very explicitly, doesn't he? And candidly. Let me quote you guys something, because I thought this was quite interesting. He chalks up their mistakes, the downfall of Mercedes AMG Petronas, to them being insufficiently self-critical to realise that what made them so strong during the early years of the split turbo hybrid era ultimately translated into a weakness. This was the cause of their losses in 2023 and since. Like, what did you make of that, Shez? Like, I feel like you've been alluding to it with all the idea that the interaction between the chassis and the aero and the suspension, all the stuff that Adrian you alluded to in his book. Is that not still shocking, those Shez, that James Allison, the god tier mind that he is, attributes Mercedes' faults to something that's so noddy, so reminiscent or indicative of technical arrogance?
Technical arrogance is a good way of putting it, isn't it? I found that part of the interview interesting because he talks about the team getting a bit complacent, and do you remember throughout that dominant era, like what we always used to hear was Toto is a glass half empty kind of guy. He's always looking at how the team can be tripped up, and yet the biggest wire that they could be tripped up on, they got tripped up by it. And technical arrogance, I think, is a really good way of putting it, because that sounds like what James Allison is saying, that we throughout that time prioritized overbody aero. It's all about aero, aero, aero. And the mechanical guys must have hated us because they were just made to cope with whatever the aero department needed, because the aero department were what was bringing performance. And they didn't realize that when the rules changed, that balance changes as well, that they were still working in a sort of bubble where aero was absolutely king. I think that's actually a line that he's used before, that aero is king, and that the mechanical guys were still sort of the bit partners within that, and needed to just do whatever the aero guys were saying. And that wasn't just Mercedes, I don't think, but he talks about it very eloquently in this interview, because there was one guy that absolutely got it right, but it was technical arrogance, I think, and I can admit that now after 3 years of this. It was technical arrogance to not realize that in the second year of this rule set, when others had, and we're sort of happy to say, look, we need to change our concept. The other thing about that was interesting, that he didn't back down from the fact that Mike Elliott was the one that was in the hot seat when all of that was happening, because he turned around and said that even if I had been there, we would have gone down the same route. I don't know how much I believe that. Maybe he was just being polite. I don't know, but he seemed fairly honest in other parts of this interview. So I don't know. But it's interesting that he would say that we would have gone down the same route even if I had been there. Sorry, go on.
I think what he means by that is that they would have gone down the same sort of 2014 to 2021 mindset, that because he said, didn't he, that we didn't sort of scrap out all of our processes and start anew with a new formula. They carried, and that's something you've been saying for ever since I've been on the podcast, that they are still acting like that team when they're not that team anymore.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting to hear, and that eventually they realized, and ultimately he did basically say the key to this formula is having a wonderful hand-in-hand balance between aero and suspension. And whereas he said, of course, in the previous generation it was just distant cousins and everything else. And of course, what's the one thing that you hear all these new detractors say, how much did he really work on the RB18? And then he turns around and goes, well, I did suggest the suspension. And of course, that's been the key pillar of their foundation of their success, and that's the genius of Newey. Because he just went, well, I think suspension is really important here, so let's really focus on that. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point that he made, and just talking about how they still acted like the team of the past, and I think that's a lesson they're going to learn for 2026, that when they do start working on that car, it's almost like they're going to just completely scrap the process and just start a new formula and just go with it.
Actually, I think that's quite a difficult thing to do, though, because that process that Red Bull had, it's more understandable and easy to see how they were able to pivot, because they've got a guy in the background that is not beholden to one rule set, one way of working. He's worked in loads of different areas and loads of different eras, so he can look at it without that baggage, whereas everybody else is kind of like, well, I don't have that experience, so the only thing I've got is what's come before, and we were really successful before, so why would that not work now?
It's not even that, is it? Because you've got basically Mercedes took we've won 8 world championships working this way. You take Newey out of the equation, whereas Red Bull probably looked at it and went, well, we need to try and get a jump on these new regs because we fell back so badly. So let's just start again. We've got Adrian, we've got Pierre Wache, we've got plenty of other people that can come together. And they identified and they had a new way of working. And it's taken Mercedes 2 years essentially to get to this point and go, oh, we should have done this really differently. I mean, he said we were really dumb. That was the most frank thing he said. We were dumb. That.
Yeah. To quote the chap, it wasn't a eureka moment. It was a no, oh my God, how could we have been so dumb moment. Mate. Yeah, we're singing from the same hymn sheet, Jack. There's a couple of things that he said that I just thought I had to write them down because the way he was talking, I was just like, this is unbelievable. It's quite easy, he said, during their peak times to misattribute your success to your collective skill and cleverness rather than good fortune. Who is this
love
chap?
that bit, yeah.
Who is he? Like,
did you notice the little shot at Red Bull, like the thinly veiled shot at Red Bull?
and I think that was balls, Baxty. Oh yeah, no. So I clocked another thinly veiled punch at Red Bull when he said that their gift was keeping themselves on the right track, but they were lucky in happening upon a genius track in the first instance. And that's where I was like, well, hold on a second, James Allison, you alluded to it earlier, Shez. This is what we're dealing with here. If there was one man who was going to have the ability to completely get the assignment as far as this new rule and reg set, that man had a name, and his name was Adrian Newey. He's been doing this since 1988 and that Leighton House March 881, right? He understood those lessons very quickly, right? Like, he talks about it in the bloody book, Shez, for pages and pages on end.
Even before that, even when he was in IndyCar, you know, the like that's when he started to really get into ground effects, right? Because that's what they were using across the pond. So he's been steeped in it. It's ever since he turned up in the Southampton wind tunnel and started using that to make cars go fast. He's had a step up above everybody else. He is the magic bullet. Like when it comes to rule changes, he's the only one there is in Formula One.
Mr. 10,000 hours round here. He even talks about it when he's attributing part of the blame for Senna's death to him not being able to adjust for the rule and reg set post the active suspension. Right? Like, who, mate? I don't know. I disagree. I loved every syllable of what James was saying, and the overly verbose tone and the analogies, and talking about slaying the complacency dragons and all that. I was hooked, literally took notes. But that one piece, when he started talking about good fortune and Red Bull, I was like, hang on a second, mate. Not hold your horses, James. Let's not get above our station just yet. But no, I thought it was incredible, man. Talk to me about what you said about Lewis Baxty. What did he make of his comment? You might not have got to those actually yet. I'll tell you what he said. So as far as the 8, this was the one that I thought was most noteworthy. He was asked about sabotage and conspiracy based upon some of Lewis's comments over the past couple of Grand Prix, being the first one that all of a sudden between free practice and quali, something happens to the car, my pace goes, the temps are not in the tyres, and like something happens, alluding therefore to some sort of foul play. The second one being 8-1 qualifying head-to-head between Messrs Russell and Hamilton, to which obviously Lewis said, listen, Natalie Pinkham, I don't think I will out-qualify George between now and the end of the season. Put to one James Allison by Tom Clarkson. Allison responded, well, if you base it upon 8-1 season to date and extrapolate that, then he has every reason not to think that he's going to out-qualify George between now and the end of the season. To that, Sir Baxter, you say what?
Well, he's saying the data is suggesting he shouldn't out-qualify him, but then he also said Lewis is the best qualifier the sport has ever seen. He's got the most poles. So it's not unreasonable to expect that he will out-qualify George again this season. And, you know, I thought his hypothesis about the way, and he was very clear that this wasn't specifically a Mercedes problem. This was a problem for everybody, that the relationship between the cars and the tyres, essentially that the car doesn't like being hustled. And essentially you almost just have to sort of sleepwalk your way through a lap and you all of a sudden finding pace, which is weird because I think a lot of George Russell fans would say that George is great at hustling an underperforming car. But then that goes against what James Allison is saying a little bit. But I get what he means, because sometimes you look at some of Max's laps and you think, oh, he's not, like, he's very smooth. But and then all of a sudden he's like on ahead by about
surprised.
half a second,
A
and you're
lot
like,
of them
what?
Baxi have been surprised. Yeah, but that's
And,
happened loads of times
and
this
then
year, right?
and Charles Leclerc at the same time, you're like, oh, that's not Charles at full throttle, and then he's stuck it on pole, and you're like, that is very odd. And Lewis is always somebody that has just driven the car at the maximum, heavy turn on the brake, and and that's worked in the previous 2-3 generations, but clearly with this car and this generation of cars, maybe not so. And that's he can't quite be as yes, he's like on rails, but he's still working incredibly hard, and maybe he needs to pull it back a little bit, but that's not Lewis's style. So I don't know.
It's interesting, isn't it, Baxi? That point about drivers being surprised about their position having completed a lap, that's happened a gazillion times thus far
RB in
this year,
particular
right?
and Haas are the two
Tsunoda's
teams
done
I've
it a lot.
noticed.
Yeah.
That they just pop up somewhere. You're like, hey,
But they're like in their radio
Yeah.
communication back to the team, they're like, really?
well, it's like when Max
pole?
got pole.
Yeah, he was
both the
confused.
races in Miami,
In Miami,
and he was like, hey,
Yeah.
how have I got pole? My lap was crap because he didn't drive it like he would normally drive it, and yet because of that. So it's an interesting hypothesis that Allison has put out there, and that's definitely something I'll be looking at this weekend.
It's happened. As soon as he said it, I was like, that has happened a number of times thus far this season. Another, you know what, Shez, let me give you this. There was another sentence that I thought was incredible, and it spoke to Mercedes' complacency, them having to fight it off. He said that he was fearful. So he arrived in 2017, right? He said verbatim, he was fearful that the team, because of complacency, were now lacking the sting of defeat. And because of that, we would not be turning over the rocks that would be necessary to stay strong. Who is this chap? Why is he not writing sonnets? Like, nuts.
I think he probably
He probably is, isn't
somewhere.
he? He probably is, and not publishing them. Shez, let me ask you this question, because he also spoke about cost cap. The question being, but for cost cap, do you think you would have caught up Red Bull quicker? His response was, I don't think so. Well, how do you respond to that, Shez? I thought that was a surprising answer for James Allison to give.
It was a relieving answer. Like, it's one of those that there have been so many. There are, like, I'm not saying this is the last, like James Allison's the last word on any of these things, right? And I'm sure if you bring somebody else on, they'll have a completely different view to the budget cap and how that's affected the competitive order. But he was very definite, wasn't he, about the fact that the budget cap was not the reason they were having the trouble that they were having in terms of making progress. I mean, you can understand the theory. There's always logic behind it. I understand where that idea is coming from. That if they'd wanted to, Mercedes could have brought a B spec car, like a proper B spec car to Barcelona last season. When they'd realised that they were going to stick some side pods on the side of the car, and we talked about them being hemmed in by the budget cap and not being able to bring like a brand new car, like you would have done in the mid noughties when there was unlimited budgets. And maybe there's some credence to that, which James Allison didn't really get asked. There wasn't a specific question to that, but when the guy that is most affected, the team that's most affected by the budget cap, or potentially affected by the budget cap, is telling you outright, I don't think that's not the reason. I kind of have to believe it, and I know that's easy for me to say because it kind of confirms what I want to hear, and I get that. I'm totally owning my confirmation bias, but it was good to hear that he wasn't laying the blame on a regulation set and was actually again putting it back on the team and saying that we weren't good enough to have improved.
Blimey, mate. It just gets techier and techier out here in these Mercedes streets. Talk to me about the Spanish Grand Prix upcoming this weekend, Baxty. What's the story that you're looking to see play out most?
I'm intrigued by Mercedes, obviously. I would be interested to see if Red Bull get back to dominance. Because I think the last few tracks haven't really suited them. This is a track that will really suit them. And if Max is just going to drive away like he normally does, then the gap closing that we've been seeing in the last few races is just a falsehood, and that Red Bull are going to be back to it. Big eye on Checo Perez, because if he doesn't deliver, then you know that McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes are going to take advantage of that. McLaren are definitely a team I'm going to be looking at, because they've been super consistently quick across all tracks this year. And since their upgrades in Miami, I'm looking forward to seeing how they get on as well. And it looks like we might get some driver transfer movement tomorrow. Lots of rumours being put around there, like Mr. Sainz at Williams and other places, maybe a Kimi Antonelli in a Mercedes. Who knows? We could see some movement tomorrow. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing how that one all plays out. I think the off-track has been just as fascinating as the on-track this year.
If not more so.
Well,
If not,
so.
Lewis Hamilton blew it up on the 1st of February, didn't he?
I know. How very dare he break the biggest news in F1 history. Shaz, talk to me about the Spanish Grand Prix. Are we mean reversion as you were as far as Red Bull's dominance, or do you think there's convergence will be the story this weekend?
I mean, the Spanish Grand Prix will definitely tell us whether or not the other teams have made tangible progress, or if it's all just based on the characteristics of these single speed tracks that they've been on so far, with big curbs and loads of lateral loading. Red Bull aren't going to have that excuse. So actually the pressure maybe is on them to show that actually they have a car for this type of track, and that when the opportunity presents itself, they dominate again. Although, look, in terms of like how the championship is panning out, we've had a couple of close races, and I've appreciated that. I love the fact that we've had close racing and a little bit of jeopardy about who's going to win a race. When, even if the same person has won it, it's not been completely nailed on every time, and that's good for me. It's what I want to see. It's what I think we're all hoping for. I just have a sneaky feeling though that Barcelona's kind of going to be a return to form, and we're going to be talking again about how amazing the race for second was, and that's going to be the conversation.
Save me.
I hate to say it, but I wonder if that is and it is going to be the off-track stuff that we're going to be having to look to this weekend.
Nobody wants that, mate. However, not to bury the lead, the bloody Silverstone promoter has blamed a similar sort of narrative on the fact that they haven't sold as much tickets as they expected. 480,000 normally scheduled to buy tickets at the Silverstone Grand Prix, and they are nowhere near. What do you make of that, Baxley, super quick?
Look at your ticket prices, you idiot.
Correcto, mundo. Correcto, mundo. 600 and 400 pounds a pop, ain't they?
You got greedy because Lewis was dominant for years.
Yeah.
Now we don't have that, and now it's all of a sudden Red Bull's fault and not your own greed.
They've got a flipping cheek, haven't they, Baxty?
Mm-hmm.
In the final seconds of this podcast, allow me to go scorched earth. How very dare you, FIA, race promoters all over the world. $10,000 for Las Vegas. What are we doing? £2,500 a pop to sit at a table at the Las Vegas Grand Prix and be hosted by a celebrity chef. Are you having a laugh? In an era where it's cost savings, where people are having to make decisions like heat or eat, interest rates are crazy, inflation's a madness. How very dare you, FIA? And then in the very same sentence talk about all this diversity inclusion stuff and how you want to engage the fan base in earnest all over the world. What are we talking about? There was once a man called Hippocrates. It's not good enough, is it really? We're greybeards and die-hard F1 fans. We'll be here watching wherever, whatever. But I think they run the risk of disenfranchising the Drive to Survivation fan base that they've done so well at attracting over the past couple of years on the back of COVID 2021. And Drive to Survive, of course, but I digress. Sad state of affairs, chaps. But I digress. You guys have been legends. That's been another podcast, the Shakedown podcast, for the avoidance of doubt. He's been Shez. He's been Baxty. I've been Cameron F1. Do me a favour, like, comment, subscribe if you're listening on a podcasting platform. 5 stars on and a follow. Por favor. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look, but never stare.